Major underwriting for A Taste of Louisiana with Chef John Folse was provided by the Baton Rouge Convention and Visitors Bureau. In Baton Rouge, our past is your present. Baton Rouge, authentic Louisiana at every turn. And People's Drugstores, serving South Louisiana for generations. George and Shirley Picu are proud supporters of A Taste of Louisiana with Chef John Folse. And by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting. Our mission is to tell Louisiana's story to the world. And by the Louisiana Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism.
Where you have this architecture, history, music.
And the bittersweet cry of the blues.
Especially the blues.
There you go.
How about a dozen?
Red beans and rice.
We rolling, y'all.
We're a nation of immigrants, a country with roots in other soils. Nowhere is that more true than in the country of Louisiana. I'm Chef John Folse, inviting you to tune in to A Taste of Louisiana and a new series dedicated to our food heritage. Louisianians are descendants of 7 primary nations that have influenced every dish we cook today. Welcome to A Taste of Louisiana. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here. How you doing, man? Nice to see you as well. Hello, ladies. How y'all doing? Good to see you. How you doing, there, baby? Nice to see you. Hey, y'all. Thank y'all so much. Hey, thanks so much for being here with us today. Just another great show. And you know what we're talking about? Early French culture in Louisiana and naturally the foods associated with it. So thanks for joining me in my kitchen. Just wonderful to have you. And stay where you are because I'm going to feed you. You know, I'm going to feed you. That's one of the perks here. You get, and stay loose on that wine, all right? Y'all, French colonists were hard to come by in Louisiana's early days. The Atlantic crossing alone was treacherous, and it seemed that was the easiest part of the experience. There were no towns or communities, food was scarce, and a loose interpretation of the law made life a little bit dangerous in this unsettled territory. And if that wasn't bad enough, there were no European women on the frontier either. Rick Seale from Fort Saint-Jean-Baptiste in Natchitoches, Louisiana, shared with us life on the Louisiana frontier. Imagine Louisiana in the early 1700s. There were no houses, buildings, or churches. There were no vegetable gardens or markets. There were few farm animals and a very small population. Not only was a food supply needed, settlers with a strong constitution and good health were critical for the survival of the colony.
So we had people from all walks of life. We had the third sons of aristocratic families who had not much else to do. We had all the way down to people who were released from prison just so that they could be colonists here in Louisiana and help populate the area.
In 1714, the French governor, Cadillac, asked Louis Juchereau de Saint-Denis to establish a post in northwest Louisiana. This original post, called Natchitoches, was built to stop Spanish infiltration from Texas at the Sabine River. Natchitoches became the oldest permanently inhabited area in the Louisiana Purchase territory and the oldest town in the state of Louisiana, older than New Orleans by about 4 years.
The early colonists had to grow a lot of their own food. We know that they were growing, of course, corn, beans, and squash again, but a lot of different kind of beans, French beans that they were bringing in, cabbages, and a lot of fruit trees. They brought peaches and many of the different citrus trees that were brought in here.
Girls were called for annually. The leadership hoped that if the men married, they would settle down and work to support their families, especially the Coureurs de Bois Canadian trappers.
The Coureurs de Bois are an interesting group of men who were traders and trappers and lived closely with the Native American groups that they were allied with. But these were people who were acted or lived just outside the law.
Ships from France also brought provisions.
Supplies coming in to New Orleans specifically would have been necessities that were needed by the colonists: cloth, clothing, utensils, metal goods, and also flour was a big item that was needed by the early colonists because they did not like to eat corn flour. They wanted to eat actual wheat flour that came from France.
According to legend, the colonial women soon grew tired of a diet of Indian corn. The petticoat insurrection ensued. The women marched to Governor Bienville's house, banging utensils on their cast iron pots, and demanded to know how to prepare these strange new foods of Louisiana. Well, Bienville sent his housekeeper, Madame Langlois, to live with the Native Americans for about 6 weeks. She learned to flavor dishes with bay leaves, to boil whole ears of corn, to make succotash, and to stuff squirrel with pecans and spices. Before long, the colonists discovered Louisiana's soil was similar to that of Bordeaux. Even olive trees grew in Louisiana, with fruit similar to that of Provence. Natchitoches encouraged colonists to grow and tend olive trees, as was done in Provence, but for some reason, they never did. Just as the petticoat insurrection was successfully quelled, the rich land was successfully cultivated, and we Louisianians have been eating well ever since. Hey, y'all, can you imagine that this little ear of corn could have caused so much disruption in an early colony? Well, the Native Americans, as one of their greatest gifts to the early colonies, felt that this was sustenance to, in fact, they said that the 3 great gifts, corn, beans, and squash, if kept in the household, would give you everything you needed. You could build a home, you could, out of the corn husk, certainly it would keep you going. And as long as you had those seeds, you would need nothing else. But yet, remember, in Europe, this was considered animal feed right here. The corn was fed to pigs and cows. So imagine when they got here and this is all they had because they didn't have access to flour. The petticoat insurrection, I'm going to have to ask my guest about that in a minute, but yeah, I think the first cooking school in America came about because a group of women demanded to know how to better use these natural ingredients growing in the bayous and swamplands of Louisiana. So we're going to talk a little bit more about corn in just a second. Y'all, I have a couple of great guests with me on the in the kitchen today. I have Darren Vermillion, who's sitting right here with us in that great colonial French uniform right there. I also have Tommy Adkins, and I got to ask about those beads around your neck there, Tommy. and just that's good costuming right there. I like that. Huh? You might have been to Mardi Gras.
Oh, trade.
Trade beads. Okay. And then Matthew Rionis. Yes, and Matthew is with the Louisiana Office of State Parks, and there's a whole story that we need to tell about state parks. But, my musicians, can you imagine? Neil and Donna Wilkinson, y'all have been here just giving us great music. I want to give you a nice hand here. And if you see I need a little help in my pot, just go ahead and get in there. Now, y'all in costume as well, playing period music of French colonization, which is the time that we're cooking from. Now, what would we be cooking today? Here we are in the 1700s in Louisiana. You heard beans, squash, corn. You heard that there was a lot of wildlife, a lot of seafood. Well, take a look at what I have here. Squash. Now, many different varieties of squash. I've cut this one in half just so you can see the seeds and how nice and white it is. This is a patty pan squash. There were yellow squash and zucchini came later, but the patty pan squash was certainly something that was growing here. And remember, squash and melons in history may have meant pumpkins, or pumpkins may have meant squash, depending on what they were writing about at the time. So the patty pan squash, what I've done with it is to peel it and take some of the seeds out, and I've poached it in this nice lightly salted water here to get it nice and tender. And of course I have some of that in this bowl, because to cook the squash you could put it in the pot, of course, without poaching it, but it would be a longer cook. I like to get it nice and tender right here. And then of course to season it, the early colonists had access to a lot of seafood, wild game, whatever they wanted. I mean, the outdoor pantry was plentiful. So we had shrimp, river shrimp from the Mississippi River, for those those folks who were, most people would not have seen these, I don't think. And then, of course, the nice lake shrimp. So I'm going to cook this this squash casserole here very quickly for you. It's a really quick little cook. I'm going to start off by putting into my pot onions, celery, and you notice I'm using cast iron here. This would have come over with the French. It would have been a trading implement, actually, to the Native Americans. Just really, in fact, Tommy, do y'all have any indication whatsoever of when cast iron first came to Louisiana?
It's hard to say. I know we have it all over the fort. We use it quite a bit in various types of cast iron pots.
Yeah.
So,
well, I know it had to get here pretty early because the Indians started frying in it, so I know they had to get it here. And cast iron dates all the way back to the Chinese, so it's been around for a long time. Now, I have my onion, celery, bell pepper, a lot of good garlic in here as well. Throw some garlic down in there and saute that around for a second. And then I'm going to put my squash in. Now, the squash is nice and tender. And you see how nice, this won't take long to cook because it's just a baked dish. And I'll saute that. Look at the colors in here, how beautiful that is. And then, of course, nice shrimp. Now, you could put crab meat, you could put crawfish. I'm sure crawfish went into this dish as well. But shrimp is my seafood of choice in here today. And I'm going to just stir that around just a little bit and allow this to cook for a minute. Now I have to come over here and chat with my guys from the Office of Parks because these guys keep all of the good history of Louisiana alive. Now, Darren, we were mentioning the Coureurs de Bois. The Coureurs de Bois, they were the trappers and the hunters that came down the Mississippi from Canada. Is that the best way to define them?
That's correct. They were the trappers and traders who distinguished themselves with the Native Americans. As Rick Seale said up there, they were just one step below the law. They were trading without a license from the King of France.
Right. Well, wonderful. We need to continue to talk about that a little bit more, but I have my squash going here, y'all. It's nice and sauteed in this pot, and it's going to cook for about, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes, just to cook down a little bit. I would season it, needless to say, with a little salt. Another great gift, by the way, even though salt has been around for a long time, the Native Americans were boiling seawater to create salt, and the Europeans were using it to preserve skins and meat. So a lot of great use for salt, a little pepper in there, and then breadcrumbs, just some nice seasoned breadcrumbs in here, and swirl that around a little bit, and it's going to go into a casserole dish. And when it goes into a casserole dish, I'm going to put it in the oven and bake it for about 30 minutes. In fact, I have some in the oven. Let me grab one out of there for you so you can see what it looks like when it comes out. Very, very nice. I baked this about 350 degrees, only for about 35 or 40 minutes because it's all cooked when it gets into the oven. It just needs to brown. Take a look at that right there. And of course, I'm going to serve a couple of spoonfuls to these guys here in just a minute. Y'all, I was mentioning corn just now. Corn and venison were two ingredients immediately available to the Native Americans, and when the early French colonists arrived on this rugged frontier, food was scarce and they depended on the indigenous people for instruction in food preparation. It was only natural that these two frontier staples, corn and venison, found their way into the same pot to create a tasty stew. On a recent visit to Fort Saint-Jean-Baptiste in Natchitoches, Darren Vermillion instructed me in the traditional preparation of this great dish. We're here in the Commandant House at Fort Saint-Jean-Baptiste, and this fort was built around 1760 in one of the French colonial outposts here in Natchitoches, Louisiana, and we're preparing a typical meal of that day. Now, what are we actually going to be cooking today?
Well, today we're going to be cooking venison and corn stew.
Now, venison, very typical of, I guess, the diet of the day because we're in the early 1700s. A lot of wild game. There's the Cane River here, so probably a lot of fish. So food in pretty good supply.
Very much so. There was buffalo tongue being shipped in from Illinois. Of course, the deer hide trade here brought in a lot of venison for the soldiers. Also, just the European stuff too, like the onions, the cayenne pepper from the Spanish has been brought in.
Now, did they actually grow their own gardens and everything within the wall of the fort? Or?
Most of the gardens were grown outside the fort. They did adapt to a lot of what the Native Americans had, of course, the corn, beans, and squash. And also brought stuff from the Spanish. They did raise peppers as well, potatoes. Of course, that's not Spanish, but...
Well, you know, one of the things that I find interesting, we're about today's drive, about four hours or so, 5 hours above New Orleans, but yet this fort would have probably been supplied also, since there were soldiers here, from New Orleans as well.
Correct, yes. This fort was being supplied from New Orleans, from the north, from Canada as well, and also from France.
Now, you mentioned some of the ingredients a while ago. Where did they get, like, say, salt from?
Well, the salt, part of the Cattle Confederacy was up north of here, and they had salt springs, and they was boiling the water down to get the salt.
The Caddo Indians, they would actually boil what, salt water?
It was the salt water coming up from the springs.
I see, and then they would sell that or trade, because it was a preservative as well.
Correct, yes.
Now let's talk about the ingredients on the table today, and because we have to start cooking here. You have venison.
Correct, venison. We got onions and garlic.
I like your little deer potholder here. That would have been typical too with the deer.
Oh yes.
Deer. Okay, well let's see. I have a pot here. So what would you have done first to make this?
Well, basically what I would have done is I had chopped up my onions and my garlic.
Right.
And I would have put them in a pot with a little bit of bear oil.
A little bear oil, or
yeah.
Now this is white flour. Was that typical of the day?
It was very typical, but it was basically set aside for the elites of the town.
Right, I got you. So you have your venison meat. You would have just kind of sprinkle the flour on top of it, the onions and garlic.
Correct,
and
yes.
then into the pot to brown nicely over the wooden fire. And of course, I guess combinations of meat or fish or game birds or anything could have gone into that pot, right?
Anything they wished.
And then you mentioned the peppers from Spain. Of course, Spain, the Spanish territory was right next door across the river, so I guess we got a lot of good spices from Spain as well, in Indian corn. Once it's all in the pot, cooking away, simmering away, water added to it. It basically is just a good corn and venison stew as we would make today, right?
Exactly.
And how long does it actually cook?
Well, what I like to do is I like to get it to a boil. Right. Then I like to lower the heat down or set the pot off the fire next to the heat and let it simmer for about an hour.
Well, let's take a look at it right here. I know you have some. I'm going to move this out of the way. You grab that venison pot, and because I want to be able to taste this. This looks really good. Now this has been cooking for a couple of hours here. The venison is nice and tender in here. I'm sure nice and spicy, right?
Oh yeah.
So I'm gonna eat the way we did back in the 1700s. Look at my silverware here. Congratulations.
No, thank you.
This has been a doggone good dish by today's standards.
It's very filling.
Thank you so much. Really a nice demo. Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't know what all the complaining was about. There's nothing better than this, especially, boiling cream with a little butter. Yeah, that's right. Boiling a pot of milk with a little butter and then salt. That'd have been an insurrection, all right, to keep them out of my house when I had a pot full of this. Y'all, I tell you, what a nice demonstration from Darren on that venison stew. I tell you, and cooking over that wood fire is really incredible as well. We want to talk a little bit more about that. But what's the next dish I want to do, y'all? Well, they said there was a lot of corn being used. Well, look what I have for this next dish. I'm doing a corn and oyster dressing that would have gone alongside a pork roast or a wild turkey. But at the same time, what was it thickened with? Normally we would do a little roux or we'd put some breadcrumbs in it. No, they used cornmeal. They actually made cornbread to thicken it. So in my pot right here, we're going to fire up. And by the way, to thin this out and to really give it some good flavor, let me grab a little napkin here, because you know what? This spoon is hot. Very hot. I have a nice chicken broth in here, and you use the bones of the chicken to do this, and it gives a great flavor to the dish. So I'm going to put this off to the side for just a second. Now let's start this off. I'm going to add a little bit onions into my pot. Again, the Trinity was always available, even in wild form in Louisiana. You could go out into the woods and get a little wild onions, a little onion plant and garlic plant to get the flavors that you needed in a dish. So to begin with, even though there wasn't a lot of other smoked meats possibly, or it might have been a rainy season or something would have kept you from having ingredients, of course onions, celery, bell pepper type flavors would have been everywhere. Now of course the corn. Right down into this pot, the wonderful corn, and I'll have that sauteing for just a second here, and then I'm going to add the oysters. Oysters were very important to Native Americans, so they gave this another great gift, even though the Europeans were eating them. America had a lot of great varieties, and Louisiana had some wonderful flavored oysters, so I'm going to put about half of them down in the pot, and that's where the tradition of our oyster stuffings come from, right here. The oysters going into the corn. So I'll let that saute for just a minute here, because I got to come back over here. I have to ask one very important question of my guest here. And you know, I want to say, guys, thanks a million, especially to Matthew, because it's the work that you guys do at the Louisiana Office of Parks that keep all of this tradition alive. Without you building these forts and training people and docents, we would have none of this history. You do so. Hey, thank these guys here, y'all. Thank you. Tell me about the original fort. I understand that the fort that's there now that we visited a minute ago is not the original fort.
No, sir. It's actually the reproduction of the second fort that was established in 1731. And it was built by Francois Brutin, who was also built the Ursuline Convent in New Orleans.
Ah.
So I guess he's a well-known engineer for the French.
You know what amazed me also is that in the wilderness, it seemed that a lot of people who supported the fort actually lived outside of the walls. Y'all made gardens out there, but people also lived outside. And how did they support you, the people who were outside the fort in those days?
Well, they supported a lot because they supplied people like the blacksmiths, the carpenters, the laborers, people who what a town needed to get started.
Was the purpose of the fort strictly protection, or what was it placed there for?
Basically, it was to keep the Spanish on their side of the border, and also
to keep the Spanish on their side of the border. But I understand that there was a lot of trading going on between the Spanish and the French, right?
Exactly. They did have a coexisting relationship with each other that probably wasn't well sought for out of the mother countries, but they helped each other out to survive.
Well, it's really amazing, y'all, that you know, you had to do what you had to do, and here's a great example of it. And I do want to thank Matthew, and I want to thank you guys for all of the wonderful history that you preserve and bring to life to everyone who wants to know more about it. You're a great credit to Louisiana, so thanks a million. Okay, y'all, so I have my shoe peg corn going here, and of course you can use you know, yellow corn. Yeah, get some frozen out of the can if you want to. You don't have to husk it yourself. I'm going to add a couple of ladles here of this really nice chicken stock, and you know, if you put water into this pot, you're going to get a good chicken flavor, because we have a bowl full of chicken meat right here that's been pulled from the bones, and the bones are in that pot. This is where I got the meat from. So I'll add the chicken meat that's all cubed and chopped into this stuffing here, and I'll stir that around. And you might need a little bit more liquid as you go, but all you're going to do here is cook this enough. Everything's cooked. Everything's cooked. So all you want to do here is to add enough of the juice to keep it nice and moist as you put the cornbread in it. Again, you're seeing part of the problem that the early colonists had. They had corn, and now they were going to use cornbread to thicken it. Just imagine we would have used something like breadcrumbs or whatever into the dish. But I'm going to put the cornbread just as they did and break it up into the pot like this, because this is going to really be, I need a little music here. I can't break this cornbread without some good music over there. Here we go. See that? Oh. All right, y'all. So this would, yeah, that sounds great. That's a good one. Now you see how the cornmeal sucks up all of that liquid? I'd put this into a casserole dish. I could have put some smoked meats in here if I wanted to. I would put it into a casserole dish, and I'll show it to you right here because I have one already done. And look at the oysters on the top of it. It's really, really nice. It roasted in the oven probably for about, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes to brown because it was cooked. And then look here, a little blueberry cobbler, peach and blueberry cobbler, because that was a staple also out at the forts. They had peaches and they had berries. Well, y'all, time flies when you're enjoying good food and good conversation with friends in the kitchen. Thanks for being here with us today, and be sure to join us next time for another great Taste of Louisiana as we continue to explore our unique food heritage. There's none better. All right, y'all, we're gonna eat.
To purchase the Encyclopedia of Cajun and Creole Cuisine by Chef John Folse, featuring more than 750 traditional recipes, a CD-ROM of the book, or a copy of the program featuring all 3 episodes of Today's Culture, call the number on your screen. Major underwriting for A Taste of Louisiana with Chef John Folse was provided by the Baton Rouge Convention and Visitors Bureau. In Baton Rouge, our past is your present. Baton Rouge, authentic Louisiana at every turn. And People's Drugstores, serving South Louisiana for generations. George and Shirley Picu are proud supporters of A Taste of Louisiana with Chef John Folse. And by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting. Our mission is to tell Louisiana's story to the world. And by the Louisiana Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism.
Where you have this architecture, history, music,
And the bittersweet cry of the blues.
especially the blues.
There you go.
How about a dozen red beans and rice? We rolling, y'all.